Oh, wait a second. To grab your book. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Zeitgeist on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Jane Roper, and I'm here today with the wonderful Eleanor Henderson to talk about her newest book, her memoir, Everything I Have Is Yours. Welcome, Eleanor. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Jane. I'm so happy to be here.
I chose this book because it matches my theme. That's the only reason. It's
Very
fire. Eleanor Henderson, for those of you not familiar with her, is the author of two novels, The 12 Mile Strait and 10,000 Saints, which was named one of the 10 best books of the year by the New York Times and a finalist for the award for first fiction from the LA Times. It was also made into a movie starring Ethan Hawke, I believe, and some other cool. Who else was in it? Who played Asa
Butterfield?
Asa Butterfield.
Yeah, Haley Steinfeld. All cool teams.
Yes.
Yeah.
Super cool, and it's a fantastic book. It's one that like I keep recommending to people, and keep borrowing. It does fortunately find its way back to my shelf, but I'm like, yeah, I need to know where it is at all times. Eleanor's stories and essays have appeared in places like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Poets and Writers, the Virginia Quarterly Review, and the Best American Short Stories. With our mutual pal, Anna Solomon. She's also the co-editor of Labor Day True Birth Stories by Today's Best Women Writers.
Including Jane.
Yes, including me. I had something in there. Yeah, that was fun to be a part of. It's a really cool book of all very diverse birth stories from all kinds of women. Yeah. Some really cool stuff in there. Eleanor grew up in Florida and attended Middlebury College and University of Virginia, where she earned her MFA. She's the chair of the writing department and the Robert Ryan Professor in the Humanities at Ithaca College. She lives in Ithaca, New York, with her husband and two sons. And her memoir, Everything I Have Is Yours, was published in August. Described as a turbulent romance meets harrowing medical mystery, the true story of the author's 20-year marriage defined by her husband's chronic illness and a testament to the endurance of love. Anna Solomon, again, says, propulsively and brutally honest, Everything I Have Is Yours tells the story of one woman's addiction to saving the addict she loves. Can a marriage built upon crisis and trauma survive? Where is the line between self-sacrifice and self-destruction? And can we rewrite the damaging narratives that shape our own stories so that our children at last will stop repeating them? A raw, beautiful book that champions radical acceptance as a means of beginning anew. I love that description of the book. It was really, really fantastic. And before we dig in, I want folks to know that they can win a copy of Everything I Have Is Yours if you have a chance to win a copy if you enter a comment or a question. And we really do want to hear questions from folks who are watching, and we will try to get to as many as we can. So someone saw me reading your book recently and was like, what's it about? And I said, well, there's so much in the book. There's so many different facets of the story of your marriage. It's about addiction. It's about illness, mental illness, physical illness. It's about love. It's about childhood trauma. But ultimately, it's a marriage, right? And that's what the subtitle is, a marriage. But it's a marriage through, when you write a memoir about anything, you're looking at through a particular lens. Mm-hmm. And the lens here is your husband, Aaron's chronic illness. Can you tell us a bit about that illness and give us some background for folks who haven't read the book?
Sure. Yeah. So as you say, the book is about a lot of things, and a lot of those things were sort of, at play for a long time. Yeah. But I can sort of, talk about the precise origin of, what we have come to call Aaron's chronic illness, which was 10 years ago this summer. Mm-hmm. And I was away on tour for my first book, and I was 8 months pregnant. And Aaron called me to say that he had a weird rash. And I said, that's weird, get it checked out if you can. And by the time I came home, it had started to spread all over his body. And so what started as a pretty innocuous rash sort of turned into these painful lesions that were really slow to heal all over his body that would seem to recur in these very puzzling patterns. They seem to be sort of stress driven at first, and then many years later began to have a really tight and really devastating sort of cyclical pattern of occurring every 2 weeks.
Right.
So, over those years, we saw a lot of doctors, a lot of specialists, and, the symptoms certainly were external. There was a skin component, and so we were seeing a lot of dermatologists, but also it was a really troubling disease in that whatever was happening on the outside also seemed to be mirrored by some sort of internal process. And so having lesions all over one's body is like really uncomfortable, and also was doing things like keeping Aaron up all night, keeping him obsessively sort of engaged with these sores all over his body. And so they started to sort of consume our house, really. Certainly, his pain was the most acute, but also there are these sort of ripple effects of, living with anybody with chronic illness. And so that's sort of part of the experience that I wanted to try to capture.
Right. Absolutely. And I think what was one of the things that seems to be most difficult about it, and I'm saying that in present tense because I know, this is ongoing, and your marriage is ongoing and intact. But is that it's so hard. It's so hard to tease apart, right? The physical, the mental, where possible mental illness figures in, where factors like addiction figure in, because, Aaron has struggled with alcoholism, and yet alcohol is also sort of used as a treatment for him, as a way to alleviate symptoms. And because these things are so tightly linked, it's made it really hard for you guys to get answers. I mean, not only to sort of find peace and relief, but also to get answers. And a lot of what you cover in the book is that quest for answers and all the various, and it was amazing, the range of doctors you saw and the range of sort of possible things that you thought it might be or think it might be.
Yeah.
And what has that been like, navigating all of that, looking for those answers?
Right. I mean, it was all consuming at a certain point. I think in the early years, Aaron had no choice but to deal with it all the time. And, I think I was driven by wanting to figure out what it was, so that I could, move on. And I'm really glad that you framed it in the way that you did, by saying, not only were we looking for peace and relief, but we also were trying to understand what was happening. And, for a long time, I felt that I couldn't really get that peace and relief myself as someone living with someone with chronic illness, without really knowing what the hell was happening to my husband. It was so perplexing. It is still really perplexing. I was just talking to a friend this morning on the phone, my friend Jen, who I think is watching while she's cooking dinner right now. And, she finished the book and she's like, so, like she still was sort of left with a like, and so you mean, is it?
Right.
And so, I guess no spoilers, still want people to read the book. But I did get to this point through all of the dozens and dozens of specialists that we saw over almost 10 years. I got to the point where I began to at least disentangle those two things, right? Like I couldn't really disentangle very easily the mental illness from the physical illness, from the addiction, which was the treatment for both. That, I had to like treat that with some acceptance, right? Like I couldn't ever really totally disentangle those things, but I was able to, I think, at least mentally sort of separate the peace and relief from the knowing. And that I think we began to understand that our job was shifting. At least I understood that my job was not necessarily to find answers, and that if we wanted peace and relief, we had to try to figure out another way to get there.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. Right. So this idea, and Anna refers to that, the idea of radical acceptance and living in a place of uncertainty and not having that uncertainty kill you, because, I mean, metaphorically speaking, not literally. But I think that is so hard for us in our culture, and maybe because of the way we think about medicine and the way we think about doctors, is we just think, and because there are so many answers out there, because the internet is out there full of possible answers, we just assume like, well, there has to be one explanation for this. There has to be, and coming up against that notion that, well, maybe there really isn't, and you can't kind of live your life waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I really held on, I think, as long as I physically could. And that was not necessarily the same breaking point as Aaron, right? Which is sort of part of the dissonance that was propelling the narrative too.
Right.
Where I held on as long as I could, I really, like I'm a professor, and, I believe in logic, and I believe in science, and, I've been able to think my way through a lot of problems in my life. And so I thought, I could just think my way toward an answer, like I'll become a neuroscientist. Like, no, I actually can't do that. Like I began to recognize my limits.
Right.
And so it wasn't the lack of trying to like think my way through this thing.
Yeah.
But I think acceptance, I was hitting my head against the wall enough times that acceptance seemed to be the only choice.
Well, and it's like, so as part of your journey, you go to Al-Anon, and so, you learn the Serenity Prayer, right? This idea of, is it like accepting what you cannot change and changing what you can't?
Accepting what you cannot change, and learning to know the difference between what you can change and what you can't.
Exactly. Yeah, and I that kept coming through my mind throughout, and sort of where you ended up, and this idea that like, well, at some point you do have to accept what you can't change, and not that you shouldn't stop taking action, but also just realizing that you are powerless in some ways, and that's not necessarily bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Al-Anon served me in so many ways as a codependent person in a relationship with somebody who's had, substance abuse issues. But it really, really helped me to get to, a place of acceptance, which is, a daily practice or whatever. Because of living with somebody with chronic illness, and, just frankly being married to a person who is a different human than you, right? Like,
right. Which is the fact of most marriages, and even as interlinked as you may feel, and as close as you may feel, as codependent as you may be in some situations, there's always going to be a breach.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions coming in, which happen to be questions that I was planning to ask anyway, so I'm going to let our audience ask them instead of me. So from our pal Kimberly, who is the host of Authors Love Bookstores, what prompted you to write this book now? And how did the exercise of writing the story help you manage your husband's illness?
Oh, thanks for that question. By the time I started writing the book, I was maybe 6 or 7 years into living it alongside Aaron. And, I just finished my second novel. While I was on tour for my second novel, Aaron came and joined me for a really romantic weekend on the West Coast. And I asked him for his permission to write the book, and he gave it to me. And so when I came home from that tour, I just, started to write immediately after, waking up. After that first chapter, Bad Night, where I write about a pretty typical night, actually, for us. We had so many of these really difficult nights where he was in a lot of agony, and I wasn't really able to understand it. And so I, as soon as I felt like I'd been given permission, or gave myself permission, I started to write it. I might have started a little earlier if I hadn't had another project going, but at that point, it felt like it was the only, I only had space for this story, because it was kind of encroaching so much on my own sort of consciousness. The question about how it's helped me to manage is really, I think, an interesting one that I tried in some ways to kind of address that question in the book. I think there's a little bit, I don't know, Jane, tell me if this still feels this way to you. There's a little bit of a meta thread in the book. There was a little more meta stuff that my editor probably wisely asked me to edit out. but I was very interested in this idea of like, how do we write about somebody else's pain without appropriating it or without causing more harm?
Right.
And I knew that writing about this illness, in some ways, I was like perpetrating the very thing that I was trying not to do or trying to learn not to do, which was to let go of the control of the story, right? And writing the book was the thing that helped me to contain and understand, as I was learning through the writing of the book, that I had to let go of any hope of really controlling or understanding.
Yes.
So it was like a delicate sort of dance that I didn't totally know how to exit, that contained after. It was the only thing I had, but it was the only thing I had, like, even though I couldn't cure Aaron, and even though I couldn't control his illness, and I, learned through Al-Anon that we can't cure or control, we didn't cause it.
Right.
I still could like control what was on the page. So it gave me like a place to put my angst, that was like, I don't know that it did no harm, but it probably did less harm than meditation was.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting irony, that by controlling something, giving yourself a sense of control, it also gave you permission to let go, made you realize you need to let go of control in a way. And it sounds like, I mean, was it a surprise to you that the process, I mean, when you set out to write it, did you have one thing in your mind? It's going to be like this, it's going to do this for me. And was that different from what had actually happened?
A little, yeah. I mean, I think I probably wanted a lot of things that I didn't admit that I really wanted out of it when I started writing it. I wanted, catharsis on some level. We talk about, writing for achieving some level of catharsis. And it did do that, a little bit every day.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that probably still isn't totally silenced. That's like, if I get this story out there, maybe somebody will recognize what's happening. At least early on writing this, I thought part of what drove me to write it was like, I felt so alone in it.
Yeah.
The two of us together alone, sort of like having these terrible nights. And I felt like, maybe this is happening to somebody else, and I know that I felt less alone reading about other people's stories about their own private pain. And so, that was probably some of my motivation as well. And, I think I wanted people also, like on a personal level to understand like some of the life choices that I'd made and like the degree of complexity, that was really operating in my house, as is the case with most marriages. So, and so I actually had a lot that I was asking of this project. And I kind of realized like that maybe some of those things were too much to ask of any book or any audience. But it did teach me about what I was hoping would come from this book.
Yeah, that's great. Have you gotten responses from readers yet, who have told you what they've gotten out of the book or how it's helped them? Because I think a lot of times when we write memoir or essays, though we're doing it partly for ourselves, we do hope to reach other people and, provide something that's going to connect.
Yeah. I mean, actually, when I sold this book to my editor, she said, "Are you prepared to get letters from readers for the rest of your life?"
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, bring it on, and so far, so far I've really been so gratified by the response. It's only been out about a month, but I've gotten a lot of notes from friends, who, definitely are seeing my life and Aaron's experience in a different way, but also, strangers who have reached out to me to say that they also live with chronic illness or live with somebody who lives with chronic illness or with addiction or with childhood trauma, and that they are really, glad that I was able to, be open enough to share. So, every one of those notes has meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've gotten like one or two like family recipes for like skin disease relief, some people who are probably, should be going to get their, become a neuroscientist or whatever.
Right. Yeah. You gotta love when people offer their own cures, or have you gotten any cannabis people yet? Because those guys always come out.
I haven't, but if you know any hookups, let us know.
No, I just remember when my daughter was in cancer treatment, we got a few like, well, have you, cannabis is blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna stick with the chemo, thanks. So one of the other reviews one of the other blurbs, which I love, and this sort of hooks into, I am going to hook this back into what you just said, but was from Adrian Brodeur, author of Wild Game, said, "This memoir might be the most candid book I've ever read." And I saw that quote after, I think I had already said that in one of my little promos, like, this is one of the most candid books I've ever read. And I think it's because you show so much of like the pain and struggle and some of the really awful, ugly, traumatic moments in your relationship, in your marriage. And it's the kind of stuff that I think so many of us, so many more people than we realize, have that kind of stuff going on, but they don't choose to share it. It stays hidden. It stays. And you had the courage to put it out there. You also talked about when you were not at your best, right? Times when you maybe weren't being the best partner you could be, or times when you let yourself down, or after the fact felt like you let Aaron down, maybe, not believing his symptoms, or sometimes when you just got pushed to the edge and we're just like, why are you doing this? Why, when there was deception involved. And so anyway, I guess I had so much admiration for you for doing that as I was reading. And also I was kind of like, yeah, you go, like, this is what memoir should be. But was it scary? Was it frightening? Like, did you worry about what the reaction would be to put so much out there?
Yeah, it was scary. I mean, for a while, and this, like, for a while, a book is just an abstract concept, even when it's on your hard drive somewhere. It's like, it's a private relationship between you and your computer. And I knew, of course, intellectually, like, once I sold the book, this is going to be a thing. And so my terror sort of lived apart from the experience of, recreating the story.
Right.
Once I was done, and then you have, like 3 chances, 3 magic wishes, to change anything during your copy editing and first pass pages and all that. Then shit began to get real. Like, I was like, do I need this person to read this thing? And actually cut a lot out toward the end.
Okay.
So there,
Did
even
Aaron read it?
What?
Did Aaron read the whole thing before it went out there?
Aaron hasn't read it.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Aaron hasn't read it. So, he says he doesn't need to relive all of the trauma over again, right?
Yeah.
And he may have other reasons too why he feels that he doesn't need to understand my version of events.
Right. Oh, that is fascinating. Do you think your kids will ever read it?
I think someday. Yeah, they really want to.
Yeah.
My 13-year-old especially is,
I'm sure.
They're very sweet and supportive, and they see a book show up in the house and they want to.
Yeah. Would you let them yet? Or are you going to say no, not yet?
Yeah, not yet. I mean, they want to read the parts where they're in it. So that feels very fair. And so maybe that.
Yeah.
But I kind of chickened out, and instead of doing that, I let them watch 10,000 Saints, the movie, last week, because they've been asking me to do that forever. So
there you go.
Instead, I let them do that, and they were like, "Oh, that was great, Mom." They were like, maybe you could have put some more drugs in that movie, Mom. I don't think there were enough drugs.
I don't think that, just not quite enough. Let's put some more drugs in there.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of 10,000 Saints, I was going to ask this question, but again, one of our fabulous viewers, my pal Marjut over in Finland, what made you choose to write a memoir instead of putting your life in fictional surroundings? Because certainly you know how to write a novel. Did it ever occur to you to bring this into a novel in some way? And 10,000 Saints, we should say, is inspired in large part by Aaron's time, like in the straight edge scene. So that's a big part of what inspired that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really didn't. I get this question, and it's a totally sensible question, but I really didn't think about fictionalizing this because I was really coming from a different place. I think with my novels, I was trying to understand a world that I didn't totally understand. My first book is about New York City in the 1980s, inspired by my husband's experiences there. And then my second book is about Georgia in the 1930s, inspired by my father's experiences there. So they felt very distant for me, very secondhand.
Yeah.
And, I was trying to enter a world from, the side. Mm-hmm. And with this book, I really felt, and then, one, that I wanted to be more accountable to my own story instead of, reaching too far out into someone else's experience. But I also just was, I think, motivated by a different kind of, energy. I wanted to understand. And I knew that the essay, that the memoir, was really built for that kind of thinking on the page.
Yes.
And I also wanted to capture, the reality.
Yeah.
And so it felt important for me to tell the truth in this case.
I'm glad you did. Yes.
Thanks.
I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask from a sort of a craft perspective. Mm-hmm. First of all, so you jump around in time a lot. Right. We start with a night in the midst of things, a recent, I think, like an incident from maybe a few years ago, a bad night. And then we jump back to your first meeting, Aaron, or maybe before that, we jump to, so we have a theory you threw out, you have the theories of what his illness might be. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided to structure the book in that way?
Yeah. So I didn't always know that the book was going to be structured that way, but I found that, as I was telling the sort of present tense story of what I came to think of as the mystery, that I also really felt that I needed to examine the history as well. And, I think part of what I wanted to explore in the book was the sort of like root system of our relationship, right? And thinking about how something like chronic illness, mental illness, addiction, how they first start to appear in a marriage, right? Like how one comes to know each other in those ways. And, for me, I always felt like, if anybody ever asked me something about Aaron, my first instinct sometimes would be to cover or edit. But also I felt like I could never really tell, the full story unless I had, 400 pages to do it. And so I finally felt like I had a little bit of space to be able to describe, the fullness of our relationship. And so I felt that I needed to go back to do that. And that sort of just became the natural rhythm in starting to, show the ways that the past sort of forecasted in some ways the future, or sort of answered a question that somebody might have about the current story.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in the course of that, we learn about how events from Aaron's childhood shaped him, about maybe certain patterns or things that had happened in your relationship before you were married and before the illness emerged. That affected, what happens down the road, because past is never past, and things accumulate one on top of another. The other thing that I really liked in terms of the writing was how sometimes, but I'm curious to hear your explanation of it. Sometimes, most of it's just in normal first person, but then sometimes you go into second person, right, where you are you. You do this, you look here, you do that. And then there's at least one passage where you're addressing Aaron directly. Can you talk about what, how you made the choices to use those different forms of tense and person and what they meant?
Yeah. Well, most of the story is in first, as you said, but, there were moments where I just felt like, I was very self-consciously adopting the second person as a way in the writing to sort of distance myself from the events, because I didn't want to believe then, and I still don't want to believe that like these things were actually happening to me, right? So like just creating a little bit of narrative distance was useful for me, and I was sort of like aware of that. It wasn't necessarily a natural fit. It was a choice. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll go back and change those second person pieces to first person at some point. But in the end, I felt like the moments where I felt that I needed to adopt that, that tool, had, did something and said something about like what it means to be like outside of your body when you're in that sort of fight or flight emergency mode, right? Which I was in quite a bit. And then I also, felt that sometimes when you're in that state where you feel like your life is at stake or someone you love's life is at stake, then the next minute you're yourself again.
Yes.
Really
and
that.
You're right. That was totally the effect it gave too, because it would happen at moments where it was like almost too intense, right? Where there was a sense that like, okay, I can't believe this is happening, or I kind of, maybe there's shame involved. Like I want to distance myself from this. I wrote an essay recently about, a really painful incident, and I just sort of instinctively did it in second person. And I wasn't sure why, but I think you articulate it well. It's like when you want to protect yourself a little bit almost, still get the impact across.
Right.
So, and then what about the parts where you address Aaron directly?
Yeah. The main part where I do that, I don't think this is spoiling anything, is at the end. And, that was something that occurred to me, as I was approaching the end, that I wanted to do, in part because of some mistakes I've made in my writing in the past, where I've really failed to engage the subject of my work as a part of the audience. And one of the things I've really learned about writing about others badly is that I think we make mistakes when we don't write for the people that we're writing about. And so, that was on my mind. I really wanted this to be a book for Aaron, even if that's a sort of, hypothetical, theoretical relationship. He hasn't read the book and he might not. Right. But I still think about it, it's dedicated to him. I still think about it as a love letter to him.
Yeah.
It's also a story about him. And so it felt important to me to look at the camera at the end. And it's sort of a tricky flip, because it starts with the you. And, I think I hoped that readers would sort of, be surprised by that you actually turning toward him.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it is the first time that's right. It's just that one section, and it is right at the end. So yeah, no, it makes sense. Great question here from Melanie. I imagine it's hard to write about something that is still an unfolding story. Was there anything that happened during the writing of it that felt necessary and hard to contain in the book in progress?
Yeah. Hi, Melanie. Thanks for that question. Yeah. I mean, almost everything. But there were definitely moments where, I felt like I was working on this book, and then I would have one of those sort of out of body experiences that we were just talking about. And, I would think both like, oh, shit, this has to be in the book. And also, knowing that it was going to be in the book gave me like a little bit of access out, like, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to be sitting at my table and I'm going to have gotten through this and I will be writing about it.
Yeah.
Actually sitting down and doing it was sometimes really, really hard. Like there was one psychotic episode that was really hard for me to write about. And I actually lost, it's like the one scene that I lost in transferring something from one file to another. I had to write it again. And that was really painful to have to do. And it was just one of the many disturbing things that was happening during this period. But it was very surreal to feel like, the book in some ways was like writing us and containing us.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was holding us, and that was helpful. And other times it was, we feel a little trapped. Like there was one moment where Aaron was having a really, really difficult day. And he said, I think I have the ending of your book, so it wasn't the ending.
Right.
I'm going. We're still in the middle of it. But, to feel that we were in the middle of our own story and then have to figure out how to live through it at the same time we're imagining, how we might be experiencing it. It's trippy.
That is, I mean, it kind of reminds me in a way of, when you're you're on a trip and you're thinking, oh, that would look really good on Instagram. You're sort of like thinking about how you'll frame an experience as you're having the experience instead of just having the experience.
I know. I don't know if there's any way out of that.
Yeah, I think for writers there isn't. I mean, I think like because we're, you know, if you're working on a project that reflects life or any time, I think our wheels are always kind of turning in that respect.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, you said that, you know, rewriting that one scene, that was really painful. Were there times along the way where you felt like this is just too hard, this is too raw, too painful to do?
Yeah. I mean, there were days where I couldn't, you know, I just couldn't sit down and do it, or that I had to attend to, you know, whatever was happening and couldn't get down there, you know, get it down for a little while. You know, and also for better, for worse, I had a book contract, you know, and so part of my relationship to the book too was like, you know, I'm writing pretty candidly about money in the book, right? I'm like, well, we got to pay $2,000 to this doctor. And so good thing that I, you know, have this money coming in for this book. And so that also became part of the sort of obligation. You know, I didn't have a choice at a certain point, or felt like if I was going to make a choice, it would have some consequences.
Right.
And, you know, that kind of became part of the story too. I think about, I bet you know the story, Jane, people like that are the only people here.
Yes.
Lori Moore story. You know that the last lines of that story.
I don't remember the last line.
So this is a story about, based very closely on Lori Moore's experience about writing about her childhood cancer.
Yep.
And the last lines are something like, "Here are the notes. Now where's the money?" You know, it's like, it's pretty sharp.
Right.
But there was a part of me that felt that way, you know, that that this was a story that was costing us something, but it also was going to like pay for our kitchen remodel, you know?
Right. Yep. That's interesting. Well, and also what you were saying before made me think, you know, you had to do this, right? So even it was when it was hard, you had to keep going.
Yeah.
And that's also really what it's like to, I kept asking myself as I was reading, I'm like, God, how is she managing, you know, through this intensity and these all-consuming issues and struggles, like also managing to have a job, like to teach, to write, to take care of your kids, to do all that stuff. But you just answered it, which is when you don't have a choice, you just do it, right? You just get through it.
Yeah.
I think I read a review where someone was sort of taking issue with the fact that you don't address that directly, but I know at the same time.
I read that review because I'm doing a really good job of avoiding those.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's totally
it wasn't a negative review. It was more like one wonders how she was able to do this.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I think it's a question that the book asks. And also, you know, I think the answer is we all just do what we can. And I'm usually doing some of it badly, you know, like I'm a terrible email inbox manager and ignore my kids far too much. And my house is a mess, you know? And also, you know, Aaron, as sick as he was, has been home with our kids for 10 years.
Right. He's been the primary.
I've been able to do these 2 jobs because he's been making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a decade.
Right. Exactly.
So, you know, as difficult as it's been, we've made it work. And there have been some really wonderful parts about Aaron getting to be so incredibly present and part of his lives and, you know, to bring us a lot of joy.
Yeah. I mean, I think this would be a very different book and a less powerful book if the two of you were no longer married. I think the fact that your marriage is still intact, that you still, you know, that you've powered through and are powering through, and that you still really love each other is really part of the power of this book. So yeah,
I think that's probably true. Yeah, thanks.
Pretty amazing. Before we go, first, if anyone has any last questions, please shoot them up onto the chat and we'll try to get to them. But I'd love to know if you can tell us, are you working on another book now?
I'm not quite yet working on another book. I'm teaching a class right now called Writing the Novella. So I'm trying to think about writing a novella with my students. And so it's just mostly a way of like exercising my brain to remember how to write fiction again, which does feel like a language that I sort of have forgotten.
Yeah.
I think the next thing will be fiction again. Yeah. I won't say that I'll never write more nonfiction because I really loved it. But
I hope you will. I hope you will.
Yeah, and you know this, yes, somebody who's now fluent in both of those languages.
Yeah. It's fun. It's they fuel each other, I think. And there's a lot. I don't know if you find I find writing nonfiction a lot easier than writing fiction, but I don't know if you found.
Yeah, I mean, next time I'll be writing about like houseplants or something. I don't know if I want to do that to that degree again, but
right. Okay, well, I think we have a winner of our Melanie Conroy Goldman Hamilton. Yay. What a cool name. You are the winner. So to get your copy of the book, PM a private message us on our Facebook page, A Mighty Blaze, or you can email amightyblaze@gmail.com. Let us know you won and give us your address, and we will make sure a book gets out to you. So
awesome. And Melanie is the author of one of my favorite novels of last year called The Likely World, published by Red Hen Press. It's amazing.
Oh, excellent. The Likely World. Okay, maybe we can throw that up into the chat. So cool. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. This was wonderful. And folks, I hope please run out and get the book. It's Buffalo Street Books, right?
Yep.
It's called in Ithaca. If you are local to Ithaca, very cool bookstore. And they can probably get it online too.
Yeah, you can order it online through buffalostreetbooks.com and just write that you want a signed copy.
Yes, right. You can get your signed copy or go to bookshop.org if you prefer. And so thanks so much for being with us. And best of luck.
Really fun.
Best of luck with